Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this event, which is being held at the Arun Duggal ESG Center at IIM Ahmedabad. And good morning to those who are in the US, and good day to everyone else who's in different parts of the world. Okay. It's a pleasure to have Mr. Kamath with us, and we will also be having later a fireside chat with Ms. Indra Nooyi, and of course, the presentation of the report on the glass ceiling by Professor Promila Agarwal. Okay. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you to discuss a topic which is not only very contemporary, but also has had a fortunate history of work which now is telling us through large amounts of data as to where really the problems lie in closing gender pay gaps. Okay. During the 1900s to 1950, there wasn't much difference in occupational segregation between women and men. There wasn't much change. But then from 1970 onwards, data tells us that more and more women started to enter occupations which men had occupied before. And one of the reasons for the pay gap in the period from 1970 to 2000 was basically differences in educational levels, as well as differences in the segregation of genders across jobs. And so it basically meant that an underrepresentation of women in certain occupations was responsible for the gender pay gap. Over time, as the education gap narrowed between genders, that part of the gender pay gap got solved. Okay? And then it suddenly occurred to researchers and many others that part of the reason you're seeing the gender pay gap is because of what's going on within an organization and the actual structure of jobs within organizations. A lot of good research came out telling us that eventually a large part of the fraction as to why women were not in the workforce or were not being paid enough had to do with the way in which jobs were structured and whether they actually offered flexibility in terms of timings as well as the ability to exit and re-enter the labor force. Okay? This is something that our keynote speaker knows very well. In fact, he led one of the big campaigns in India which actually changed this for India as well as the world. Very interesting studies which were done in the 2000s onwards have actually showed us that, for example, in countries like even Denmark, that women after childbirth moved from a private sector to a public sector job. Large data sets in the US have showed us that 2/3 of the gender pay gap is really attributable to women having to take on childbearing roles and exit the labor force because of that. So more and more organizations which have actually allowed flexibility for work are the ones in which women seem to be a lot more in, and in which the gender pay gap is much less. So these are exciting times for researchers. Large-scale surveys are also showing us differences in the way in which women and men perform at various jobs, as well as behavioral research is throwing up interesting outcomes as well. A recent behavioral study that I saw was very interesting. It showed how empathy or altruism is different across genders. So if you take the case of, say, tipping at a restaurant, it was interesting that if the bill value was small, then men tend to tip more than women. But once the bill value went beyond the threshold and there were large bills to be paid, women actually tipped more than men. Okay, so interesting how empathy, altruism is different across genders. But over to the program. Thank you for joining us at IIM Ahmedabad and at the Arun Duggal ESG Center. I look forward to an eventful evening. Thank you so much to all of you for joining in at this event. I now give the floor to Anish, who is the co-chair of the ESG Center. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor D'Souza, for setting the agenda, setting the tone for the evening. A warm welcome to all the panelists, invitees, Mr. Kamath, Mr. Duggal, Ms Nooyi, and a very warm welcome to all the participants for the event. We have very good participation today from across the board, corporates, researchers, students, IMA students. There is a lot of participation, and I'm glad that this is our inaugural event for the ESG Center, which was recently set up at the Institute with generous support from Mr. Duggal to improve the performance of organizations on ESG, environmental, social, and corporate governance dimensions. This is a nascent area of research. Exceptional work is being done across the globe, and the ESG Center at IMA aims to become a center of excellence, pushing the frontiers of research, as well as setting up a platform for dialogue between practitioners, researchers, and regulators at this early stage when deconstruction of ESG is happening at various levels. People are trying to understand how to read ESG, how to implement ESG, and how to regulate ESG. So the center aims to play its part in all these aspects. As the first inaugural event, I'm very glad to introduce you to Professor Promila Agarwal, a dear colleague, a member of the HRM area and the strategy area. She, along with Mr. Duggal, has led this research project, something very important for the center. It intersects on two major dimensions of the center's priority area: the social dimension, which includes diversity, as well as corporate governance. Now, the glass ceiling report specifically talks about mobility, talks about pay gap, and talks about diversity on the board to a large extent, which has its, as research has already shown, direct implication on corporate governance outcome. More of which we will hear directly from Professor Promila. Mr. Kamath is here, and then we also have our invitee, Ms Nooyi, who all of them are stalwarts in this area, have contributed immensely to improving diversity and representation on the board and in general in the workplace itself. Professor Agarwal is a psychologist. Among many accolades, publications, and research projects which she has led, she's also a recipient of the Indra Parekh Award. She advises several Fortune 500 companies as well as startups. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much, Professor Agarwal, for taking up this study and doing a fantastic job of it. I'm sure this is going to start the conversation. It's definitely not the end. It's going to start a lot of conversation, and we hope the center will be able to support many follow-up studies which would come up from this. So once again, I hope all of you would have a very enlightening and insightful, engaging conversation around the topic today. Let me invite Professor Agarwal to take over the platform and make a brief presentation about her research findings. Over to you, Promila, and all the best.
Thank you so much, Anish, for that introduction. Greetings, very good morning to Ms Indra Nooyi, and a very good evening to Mr. K.V. Kamath, Mr. Duggal, Professor Errol D'Souza, faculties, colleagues, students, guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor for me to stand here and present this report in the presence of Ms. Nooyi, Mr. Kamath, and Professor D'Souza. So before I begin with the report, I'd like to share a bit of history of this project and how this project came up. So at the point when this project landed on my desk, the scope was simple: to identify the gender pay gap and design intervention to fill that gender pay gap. And it so happened that the first set of data that we got, just like any other scholar, I decided to perform a bit of basic analysis to see the kind of pattern that is emerging. And I was shocked that how there were no females in the first set of data. And I called up Mr. Duggal and I said, maybe this project might not be possible for the simple reason, in order to study gender pay gap, you need to have gender or females on the board. And with that, we expanded the scope of the project. And now, as you can see, the research is dominantly about leadership, gender balance, and not just pay gap. So, like I mentioned, these are broad objectives that we are that we have for this project, and the follow-up reports that hopefully we'll be presenting to you. This is the broader structure that I'm going to be following. In the first section, I'll be briefly talking about the kind of studies that we have at this moment. In the second section, I will talk about the method. Third one, I'll present the research finding. And in the next one, in order for design any intervention, we need to know where the problem is. So I'll be talking about that in this section. And lastly, there is a team of people who have supported this project. So I'm going to talk about that. The idea over here is that women participation, as you can see in the graph, India is lacking behind. And this percentage to bring to your notice is for all the entire workforce. And the thing is, as far as academic literature is concerned, there is a body of literature that confirms that having women on the board is associated with range of favorable organizational outcomes, such as increased ROI, innovation, successful expansion to new markets, corporate governance, and reduced lawsuit. And to put it in hard economy figure, as it is presented on the slide, it is estimated that we'll add up $700 billion to our GDP. So if not for the values such as equality and justice, for all capitalistic reasons, it makes sense for all of us to pay attention or strive to have a gender equality. Next. Okay, so as you can see that, there has been an increase in women directors from 2014 to 2030. IS is very firm on its statement that it is because of regulatory requirement. I also second that because the number is just touching the regulatory requirement. Okay, now this is another interesting graph that I have for you. Companies year after year, they are coming with the same problem, that how despite significantly investing resources in hiring and paying women equally at the junior level, for some reason it is not translating at the top. And that's the problem which this project is trying to solve. Now, coming to method and procedure, what we did was we contacted all the, so there is a bit of lag that we are experiencing. Okay, you do one thing, keep it here only. So in the method section, what we did was we contacted all the NSE 200 firms. Okay, so we contacted all the NSE 200 firms, and we requested them to provide us with the information of all the senior executives who are earning above 1.02 crore per annum. And along with NSE 200 firms, we also contacted NSE and IAS because they consistently interact with all these firms for the data. And it was very kind of both IAS and NSE team to provide us with that information. And after reaching out to all the firms, we landed up with 124 companies responding us with the data. We decided to exclude all 15 public sector companies because they are exempt from compliance of Section 197, Chapter 12 of this Act. Having said that, 5 public sector companies did come back to us saying that they don't have anybody who's paid above 1.02 crore per year. So my sense is broadly that public sector follows a government pay scale, so there will not be much of variation. So finally, we are landed up with eligible sample of 109 companies and 4146 senior executives. And within that, we had to exclude 99 executive from the data because the companies provided us with the names of the executive. Gender information was not available. So that's the method and the sample size that we have. I'd like to request audience to pay a bit of attention to this slide because our operational definition might vary with the nomenclature. So the first is the women director, the number of women who are included in the board of director. Top management, top 10 individuals who are paid as per the salary that they draw. Then we have women in top management, number of women who are in top management. Then senior executives, all the executives who are earning more than 1.02 crores. And then we have women senior executives, that is number of senior executives who are women, including top management. Yeah. So these are the key findings that we have. So as you can see, the women director 16%, just to take you back to the first slide that I showed, that even in the previous 2 years, it was just 16%, and now also it is 16%. And when it comes to women in top management, there are just 5% women. And women senior executives, they are low at 7%. This again, somewhere partly reflecting that while companies have given a designated role to women, but the pay is still a problem. As you can see here, the average compensation that is paid to women is 1.91 crore versus men are being paid 2.24 crores. And in other words, it's, an executive is earning, women executive is earning 85 for every 100 rupee that a man earns. So these are the top performance based upon the number of women directors that a company has. HDFC Life and Syngene with 4 women director. And then we have Asian Paints, Bharti Airtel, Cipla, Dr. Lal Path Labs, Federal Bank Limited, ICICI Bank Limited, Lupin, Piramal Enterprises, Titan Company, and UPL Limited. Now, coming to the women top management, I'll be moving from this slide and the previous slide back and forth just for you to see the difference and highlight the gap. So here, when it comes to women in top management, Cipla and Trent are the companies with 3 women in top management, and Bicon, Castrol, Cummins, Divi's, Hindustan Unilever, Housing Development Finance Corporation Limited, Kotak Mahindra Bank, Piramal Enterprise, and Titan Company, they have 2 women on top management. And as you can see, it's mentioned on the slide, 76 companies do not have even a single woman in the top management. Now, if I go to the previous slide, which is top performer based upon directors, there are only 2 companies that are common. There are 3 companies that are common. That is Piramal Enterprise, Titan, and Cipla. Again, reflecting that there are women directors, but they are not making to the top management list. Now, coming to the number of women senior executive, in HUL, there is maximum representation as far as percentage is concerned. With 22 women, Kotak Mahindra has 26, HDFC 18, and ICICI Bank 14, and L&T 40. Again, if I have to back one for this slide with the previous slide, the pipeline is still dry, with making significant number of increase, and the only common forms are Hindustan Unilever and Kotak Mahindra Bank. This, when we divide the numbers based upon the functional role that women are performing in the finance, as you can see, we have 40 women in HR, 28 in IT, 25, then 24 in operations, and 20 in marketing. I'm going to explain this slide along with the next slide. Now, when we divide it in terms of the industry, again, in the financial, topping the charts with 82 women. In IT, there are 74, 34 in consumer goods, 20 in pharma, and 14 in consumer services. So there can be broadly a couple of explanations to explain these numbers. So when we look at banking and finance, from a couple of decades, you see women have been leading the financial institute at the forefront. So there is a strong role model effect, because of which the industry also come across as a safe and an inclusive place. The second explanation is that the industry has outgrown the talent market. Therefore, they're reaching out to each and every talented person, which might not be case with the other organization. And to understand the third one, we need to go back to possibly the time when all the senior executives that we have in our sample, they were pursuing their professional degrees. My sense is this, or even for today, even today for that matter, the social and the financial barrier associated with pursuing commerce, accountancy are limited in comparison to engineering, in comparison to medicine, or doing an MBA. Because for engineering and medicine, one might have to take a break of 6 months or 1 year just to prepare for the entrance exam. And that 1 year gap for a woman is a lot of value, simply because there is a pressure to get married at a socially right age for women. So this is possible explanation. And as far as HR is concerned, this field has been plagued with the whole issue of feminization. While there has been increase in the data as far as men also, as far as men are also concerned in the domain of HR. So now when again I compare the women director with women in top management, you can see there is a significant gap. Again, confirming that women are not paid well while they are making to the board. And if I am an eternal optimistic person, so I'm going to see it as a glass half full, that, okay, they are given positions. So let's see, hopefully with this intervention, we will be able to reduce the pay gap as well as we move forward. All right. So now, like I said in the introduction, in order for us to design any intervention, we need to know what are the barriers. And based upon our analysis, we had a list of themes. In the interest of time, I'm going to only talk about the one that are relevant in the Indian context. Second, the one that are counterintuitive and more insightful in comparison to the another. So typically, whenever we talk about why women are not making to senior executive position, why they are not making to the board, there are usually 3 explanations. One, that they have different goals. So basically, they are saying women doesn't want job, power, status, and money. The second reason they quote, okay, they lack self-confidence, they have an esteem problem, they are full of self-doubts and so on. And the third reason is that there is a strong conflict between personal and professional life. While that's true, but that's also part of the story. Woman does not just suddenly begins to experience a strong conflict between personal and professional life. It begins as early as when she is pursuing her graduation. So when women in the second year MBA program, they were asked as to what their career aspirations were, be it job, money, the nature of job. There was no significant difference in their career aspirational versus career aspiration of their male classmates. But when the same women were asked for their career aspiration in the marriage market, they started to underplay their career goals. All said and done, as a society, we have progressed a lot. But even today, man is not comfortable marrying a woman who's earning more than him. And this is a very beautiful game that both men and women, they are kind of playing with each other, where a man is busy boasting about himself and woman is busy underplaying herself. And a very interesting statement was made by one of the women board member I was talking, and she said, Promila, men are feminist as long as they don't meet a woman who's better than them. While the problem is also that women are also not interested in marrying men who are earning less than them. Now, the thing is that this whole process of underplaying self is not just limited to, in the context of relationship. Over the period of time, it's taking life of its own, and women are underplaying across domains in all interpersonal interactions that they are having with men. And this is partly happening because the way we understand masculinity and femininity. Now, right now, nobody can question my femininity or say that, oh, you're not a woman enough. But masculinity can be questioned. Now, because it can be questioned, because it can be threatened, it has to be protected. So everybody is busy protecting that fragile masculinity. And because of which we see reflection in the corporate world, that is, we see that reflection in the form of the statement that we hear, oh, women lack confidence, or women have self-esteem issues, and so on. And again, this dilemma further take lives of its own as they move in the organizational setup. And rest three lines, I think all of us are aware of, whether a woman is a PM, CM, CEO, or she has 10, 15 people to take care of house help. If there is no food on the dining table, the responsibility belongs to the woman. So there is this constant monkey on the back. So that is where the family shapes up the entire setup for the kind of challenges that women experience as she moves into the organization. And now coming back to the organizational level, the first and the major issue is that the whole concept of leadership is gendered. If a woman is displaying feminine characteristic, then she's not fit for the role. And if there is woman who begins to display the masculine concept of leadership, then she's not living the expectation of feminine roles, and for which she's punished, that she's not being the ideal role model of what a woman should be like. So women are constantly struggling and trying to maintain that fine balance between being authoritative yet participative, taking care of themselves yet speaking for the team, being demanding yet caring, maintaining decent distance from the people and yet being approachable. And this is where it makes it harder for women to find the space in the senior executive level. Again, if I have to share one conversation, one of the senior executives said, Promila, if companies start hiring executives basis empathy and compassion, I don't think men have any chance. So that is the extent to which leadership is perceived. And sadly, we are telling women, you need to be more confident, while the data suggests that women are not underconfident, they're high on self-awareness. The problem is men are overconfident, and we are okay with that. The next one is all the data that we have so far predominantly says that the problem is coming because of networking issues, because of lack of mentoring. But we found was that while all these elements are important, but they cease to become important at an executive level. It is not networking or the mentoring part. At this level, if you look at all the celebrated CEOs, you will notice in their stories and autobiographies that how there were one or two influential people on the board who relentlessly backed them. And that's the kind of backing that women doesn't get, which is sponsorship, someone to stand for them, someone to speak for them, particularly when they are deserving, because game at the top has a very low margin. So sponsorship becomes more important than mentorship and networking. And this is happening with the problem that we know as glass partition. Again, when I was talking to one of a male member, he said that I'm a very straightforward and aggressive guy, and I have a decent history of fighting with entire board to get one of my male colleague promoted, which he thought was very deserving. But he said that he could not pick the same fight for one of his female colleagues. And he said that if I go and fight against the entire board, if the board doesn't agree, then I will have to first explain it to my wife. And that brings us the problem of the cross-sex professional friendship, which comes at the risk of people romanticizing it. And that has cost for both men and women, but the cost is greater for women. Then, as we all know, micro expressions of discrimination, faulty assumptions, lack of opportunities, and negative attitudes toward women and managers. So the thing here is the system that a female is operating is constantly reminding her that this battle is not worth fighting. And the probability is very less. Now, because the battle is not worth fighting for, so you finally make that call, okay, if it's not worth fighting for, the probability is low, so then I might just maintain a fine balance and pursue different interest. And the same system is constantly telling the man that, you can't leave this battle, because if you leave, then you're not man enough. And with that, it starts exhibiting in the behavior that women exhibit. The social conditioning, women are much more likely to opt for assignments, projects that are not at all connected to their promotion goals. They do not negotiate. They actively do not seek power and status. While there are also contrary studies which they say that eventually, if at all they do that, it still doesn't meet that feminine requirement. So their requests are anyway not met. So it's again a combination of both. They're not making effort, other agents not responding to that. So this whole system is happening because women are constantly in a space of stereotype threat. So no matter what they do, they find themselves falling behind. And lastly, the society, the gender stereotypes and discrimination, that this entire thing is part in the macro level issues. And this is how they all are connected. Now, the big question we have is what next? Of course, going forward, Mr. Duggal will be making a detailed presentation on recommendation, and we look forward to designing detailed presentation industry-wise as well as company-wise to design systems and processes so that we can improve the gender leadership balance. Having said that, based upon this data, if I have to leave with one broader recommendation, what I noticed was that all these biases, attitudes, stereotypes, and prejudice, they are finding a comfortable home in this one larger theme, that is childcare. Oh, she must be busy with the child. Oh, she will not be able to travel, and so on. So my sense is, with the kind of economic expansion plan that this country has, I don't think we'll be able to achieve it without making childcare a priority at a policy level, at a central government level. We are high time, like we say that, it takes a village to raise a child. We no more have those villages, which essentially mean we need to create those villages, not for the sake of supervision, but a setup where parents of all socioeconomic status can leave their child behind in a psychologically stimulating environment, safe and affordable. Once this whole baggage is taken care of, my sense is everybody in the organization will calm down. And irrespective of gender diversity, I don't think it's a sustainable model to have thousands and thousands of people walking in office with the guilt in every cell of their body for failing to take care of their spouse and their children. So with that, I'll close my presentation, and we will have a detailed recommendation presentation from Mr. Duggal. And with that, I'd like to very precisely mention, I'm very grateful to Moksh Garg and Abhishek Rakshit. I could not have asked for a better team than Moksh and Abhishek. Then I'm very grateful to NSC team.
Thank you so much, Professor Promila, for that insightful presentation. And here's hoping that the recommendations and findings of this report find their way to corporate India, get adopted, and help us in improving leadership gender balance. Good evening, everyone. I am Chavi Mudgal. I am CEO of the IMA Endowment Fund. And on behalf of the Institute and the fund, a very warm welcome to all of you. Delighted that we could be part of this project, thanks to the generous contribution of Mr. Arun Duggal, who's also a founder of the IMA Endowment Fund. This is also the inaugural event of the ESG Center, and my congratulations to the co-chairpersons, Professor Sugatan and Professor Desai. I've also had an opportunity to work very closely with Professor Promila on this project altogether, and seeing all the wonderful work which is being done. Congratulations again, Professor Promila. It's my privilege and honor now to introduce our keynote speaker for this evening, veteran banker, Mr. K.V. Kamath. We are very proud to say he's an alumnus of IMA and passed out in 1971. Began his career with ICICI, which was, of course, a DFI at the time, and hence had both development and financial objectives. It's therefore, I think, very interesting to see that after 50 years, sir, you're now back to being chairman of a DFI, National Bank for Financing Infrastructure and Development, which is a 20,000 crore institution just set up in 2021 to catalyze investments in the infrastructure sector. In 1988, Mr. Kamath moved to Asian Development Bank and spent several years in Southeast Asia before returning to ICICI as its MD and CEO in 1996. We all know that those were the years just after liberalization, and it was difficult times. There was lack of liquidity, high NPAs, interest rates, of course, were very high. And despite these challenges, and as the banking sector sort of grew, under Mr. Kamath's leadership and ever optimistic attitude, ICICI Group, of course, transformed itself into a diversified technology-driven financial services group, gaining significant market share across all businesses, may they be banking, insurance, wealth management, asset management in India, and of course, internationally as well. In 2009, Mr. Kamath retired from his executive role as MD and CEO of ICICI Bank and became the chairman. And then he was invited to be chairman of another stellar Indian company, Infosys, on its board in 2011. He's also been on the board of companies like Lupin and Schlumberger. And of course, sir, you've also been on the governing council of our very own IMA. For his contributions to the Indian economy and the banking sector, Mr. Kamath was conferred with the Padma Bhushan. He has, of course, received widespread recognition in India and internationally with several awards. And we are so delighted to have you here for all of the above reasons. But in the broader context of this evening, we also thank you for the role that you've played over the years in recognizing women and creating an equal opportunity environment in ICICI. And now I please cordially invite Mr. K.V. Kamath to address the audience.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, Professor Agarwal. This is Arun Duggal, Professor Agarwal, all other teachers from IMA, and all I would believe who are today on the call. Good evening, good morning. Thank you, Professor Agarwal, for that fascinating presentation. I'm saying fascinating because I lived through several of the things that you said, so they deeply resonate. To the extent that I can recall, I will try to stitch in some of my own experiences in the context that you mentioned, maybe as small stories or otherwise. What I'm planning to do today is really talk about what I would like to put as my learnings, more than my experience. My learnings in how an organization that is ICICI Bank became what I would like to term as gender neutral. If you're truly gender neutral, then no ceilings exist. So I will call it a gender neutral organization, which in a way achieved its objectives in terms of doing away with the glass ceiling. I will touch on four broad areas. The genesis of this whole process, as it were, actions that we took, challenges that we faced, and the outcomes. And these are all our own learnings, because when we look at this whole exercise, I go back to 1985, 86. That's when it started. And there was not much literature in terms of the subject matter at that point in time. And a priori, we did not have any roadmap, to be very frank. There were no targets and no ideas or action plan that was to be set, no challenges and no outcome expectations. So we go back to 85 and the story starts. And I would say that the credit for this story really goes to my predecessor at ICICI, Mr. Wagul, who was the chairman and CEO till I came in as the CEO in 96, and he became the non-executive chairman. So what did he do? I think he inculcated a culture where we went out and recruited from all campuses. Those days, predominantly it was IIMs. And I would think somewhere he brought out this ethos that it should be recruited in a merit-based way without any biases, broadly. The other pool of talent we found, which also has given us senior leadership, was the graduating class of chartered accountants. So, there again, in a gender-neutral way, if you keep merit at the forefront, you will get a good pool of people who will stand you in good stead. So, really, I would think that the first key in terms of our path to this process was recruiting in a gender-neutral manner, purely on merit. And I should say that right from day one, it was equal pay. So the pay issue that Professor Agarwal mentioned, I don't think is something that we have faced in our organization, because right from the time we did the professional recruitment, it was on the same basis. Cut to 1995, I was away for those 8 years that Ms Duggal mentioned. I was with the Asian Development Bank. So when I came back in 1996, actually, I found that ICICI had a pool of leaders, women leaders, consequent to the actions that maybe Mr. Wagul had initiated. I must say that in the first 2 years, I was also doing the recruitment at various campuses. That is in the 86, 87 period before I moved away. But when I came back, we had a pool of talent that had grown within the organization to a fair level, in the sense that the growth was seen, was visible. And what was also visible to me was that there was scope for them to grow even more. Again, at that point of time, no goals in terms of we should have gender balance and so on. Just a goal that we need to run at merit, and we need to make sure that there should be no pre-biases in terms of the jobs that you do. And there are a couple of things happened here, which I must point out. One in particular, I think I will mention here. Some I could mention later on as a storytelling exercise. And the first time it got into my mind that maybe men are not reading what a woman could do, or are building biases in our mind. That happened very interestingly. Because I found that we were a project finance institution, as was mentioned. And one day I was clearing projects for the next board meeting. There were 2 or 3 women leaders and 2 or 3 men who were leading those appraisal teams. So I knew that 1 or 2 of the projects were very hard projects, and the team would have been working late. So I casually asked the people around the table, and probably it was a woman leader, as to what time did you go home yesterday night? And this is 96 or 97, when things in Mumbai weren't that comfortable. So this lady answered, I went home at 2 o'clock. I was a bit taken aback. So I said, how did you go back home? She said, I went home in a taxi. The next question that I asked, and the answer that I got shook me. In the sense, the question that I asked was, were you comfortable going home? And this lady looked me straight in the head and in my eyes and said, yes, I was comfortable going home taking a cab. What struck me then was that we are building biases in our mind in trying to assume that this is not something that a woman can do. If she has to work till 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock at night, I will rather have a man do this, because I don't want to get into a complication with somebody being uncomfortable. Having said that, I just want to complete the loop on this. So what I did was, I basically called HR very quietly and admin very quietly, and I said, if any lady works beyond 10 o'clock at night, we make sure there is a car to take the person home. Yeah, you may say that I differentiated, but I think I differentiated based on what I thought were the circumstances in those days. I thought that despite the woman leader, not really articulating any fear, I said that I was not comfortable, and I put that in a place. So that's just about the one day that we put in place to encourage our women leaders to feel comfortable in the workplace, and if they felt like it, work late and deliver value to the organization. Just about that time, 96, 97, we found that we could create a whole a big slate of women leaders who then became the known faces of ICICI. But there again, there's a very interesting point that Professor Agarwal mentioned, and it got addressed. Some of the challenges got addressed, and probably the solutions came out of some actions that we took. Those were the days when grading on the curve became the fashion, the bell curve. I know that there are pros and cons about it now, but in 97, I thought that was something that we had to put in place in an organization which did not have the structure to rate people in a proper way. And by then, we had at least, I think, 2 women or 3 women leaders who would have been appearing at the grading table, as it were, who were either on the board, or 2 of them certainly were on the board, I think, and 2 were just about to get on the board. And they were part of the evaluation exercise. So issues that were raised here, promotion and that. So you had people who were willing to fight for a cause, as it were. But I must say that even they did not differentiate between a woman and a man. What they did was say that let's start with the assumption that everybody can do every job. And this is a merit-based organization, and we will drive that as a single focus. Again, in terms of pay, the comp will be equal, whether it is a man or a woman. I think that their being there was, in a way, shaping the path forward. I must give complete credit to these women leaders and the exercise that we had. The bell curve, the grading on the curve, accepted or not today, I don't know. But at that point in time, that set us on the path for merit-based organization, merit-based assessment, and really speaking, no, I would say, biases in terms of what we were doing. There were several other issues that came up around this time, particularly as we became more of a bank. And of course, finally, we merged into the bank. The first, again, was a bias in the minds of men that even if a branch is going to be slightly late, in those days, when we first experimented with branches which are staying late till 6 or 7, we can't have a women leaders in the branch because that's not going to be comfortable. But very interestingly, my own experiences, particularly the one I gave about women going home late at night and feeling not uncomfortable about it, gave us the next big push in ICICI Bank, that is to work till 8 o'clock. So our branches worked 8 to 8. I don't think by now people would have forgotten about it. All branches in ICICI Bank, I think starting 2002, were running 8 to 8, 2 shifts. So we had a shift, mid course changing, and then you had another set coming in. Then came the question in the second shift, which runs till 8 o'clock, do you have women leaders? I said, no biases. We need to get them on merit, and we will see what happens thereafter. Again, it was very interesting. There are two examples, two stories I'll tell you here, I think, which are very important. The first was, I don't think the women leaders had an issue of working late. But the parents, the family structure that was mentioned by Professor Agarwal, certainly had an issue. So it was not uncommon for 1 or 2 of our senior board, women leaders on the board to get calls from either parents or in-laws of these ladies who are working late. And that was, as I said, 8 o'clock, who would call up and say, my daughter-in-law is working late, or my daughter is working late, and have a litany of complaints. And the woman leader on the board would hear them out, diffuse them, and then cool them down, and then have a word with the woman leader who's working till 8 o'clock or whatever, past 8. And it will be interesting, right? It's interesting to note that every single instance where this feedback was given to the leader that somebody in your home is having a challenge was actually an aggressive response, virtually starting with who are they to interfere in my life. So you now get an idea as to what the dynamics are. Of course, I think our women leaders on the board were very understanding and managed to diffuse the situation and let have this lady progress in her career, continue with what she was doing and so on. Other instance was in terms of when things, you need to do a task and you have a challenge, like let's say this is working late 8 o'clock. I found that people are working till 9:30. And when I asked this question, the answer would be, end of day work. Remember, those we're talking about early 2000s. Everything was batch processing. So cash had to be reconciled before that shift ended. And then the system had to be shut down. System had to be handed over to the center for keeping as it were, housekeeping as it were. And before it was handed back next morning at 7:30 and so on. So this meant that people stayed on in the branch till 9, though it was 8 officially. I was very unhappy with this. And I actually tasked the whole organization to say, how can we make sure that people who finish at 8 leave within the next 2 minutes? Most of my colleagues said that's impossible. So interestingly, one day I was in a branch in Chennai. I still remember. There's a Mount Road branch in Chennai. This is 2002 or 2003. And this was hot in my mind, working late. So the deputy manager of the branch was a lady. So I asked her, yesterday, what time did you hand over your system? So she said, 5 minutes past 8. I stopped in my tracks. This is a large branch in Chennai. And I said, how did you do this? So she said, sir, what I did was very simple. At 6:30, I started reconciling the progress of the payments and other things that had to be done, so that by 8 o'clock, I had probably 95% of the work done. So only the last 1 hour, some reconciliation had to be done, which could be done in the next few minutes. And we handed over the system and we went. You won't believe it. That was then systematized and put as protocol across all branches. And from that day onwards, women leaders, that initiative and that lateral thought meant that we actually shut the shop at maybe 5 minutes past 8, latest 10 minutes past 8. So point that I'm making is we build biases. We do not give credit for lateral thought that is possible, solutions that are possible, and which come out of leadership. I can go on and on. I know that I have a constraint and we'll need to stop in another 5 minutes. There are so many stories of lateral thought to improve efficiency and drivers. And the other thing that I find is women leaders do not take no for an answer, and rightly so. And they then bring about a change in terms of mind by giving you a rational solution with, I would say, controls on risk which are appropriate. Maybe I'll give another example of this. We had, again, very few branches in those early days. We were growing very rapidly, 30-40% growth. Branch expansion, it was regulated, so we could not grow at the same pace. So the branches were getting overcrowded. This lady leader comes to me and says, I have a suggestion. What is it? Said, we don't count the cash that a customer wants to give to the cashier. So my reaction was, I didn't say anything at all, but this is daft, was my reaction. So I said, how do you plan to go about this? She said, sir, the customer will put the money in an envelope, say 50,000 rupees. He will put the deposit slip saying that 50,000 rupees. And on the envelope, we will print the account number and the customer's name. And he will give it to any desk. We will have 1 or 2 desks, not the cashier necessarily, one of these 2 desks. And the receipt will be given immediately across the desk. I said, cycle time? She said, 30 seconds. How much is the cycle time at the cashier? 15 minutes. So I said, yeah, what you say is logical, but what if the customer then comes back and says, I put 50,000 and you are saying it's only 49,000. So this is where the controlled risk approach came in. This lady said, sir, you're not catching what I'm saying. I'm putting the whole transaction under a camera, which is going to be 24/7 on. And then all this go into a sack, which is sealable, gets sealed under camera and is moved to a back office, not even in the branch. And it's opened under camera, the seal is opened, and then you reconcile the cash from each of these envelopes. I couldn't find fault, except that if something happened, we still may have to answer the customer that, you actually put 49,000 and not 50,000. Long story short, 2 years or 3 years that this was there, the only complaint I got was from customers when I went on a branch visit to say, why are you keeping that limit at 50,000? Why can't you make it 1 lakh? Because it's a game changer for us. And did we have any, slip-ups that happened? 1 in the 3 years that I could remember. Where exactly like I said happened, the customer said that I put so much and the bank said different number. But the bank was wrong because at the end of the day, when you reconciled all cash, we found that we had undercounted that particular deposit or something like that. What I'm saying is the ability to bring lateral thought is there. So I heard a question saying that, is there a male bias to say, protect the male turf? I think we are losing a huge thing by trying to protect the male turf in this context. Quickly moving on. One other thing that we found very useful in growing the pool of women talent was putting women into cross-functional roles. Of course, men also went into cross-functional roles, but in the context of a woman where openings could be limited, can you put them into cross-functional roles? Let me use one which I think in today, if you talk about in the bank, they will say this was a very risky move. This was moving our top legal talent, who I knew could not get to the number 1 position there, as head of our treasury. And then lady also became head of HR. This is a well-known name. Everybody can place the person that I'm talking of. This is Kalpana Morparia, who became later on chairperson of JP Morgan India. So basically a lawyer who was number 2 in the legal department. I had to move laterally with a promotion maybe as head of treasury and then head of HR. Of course, then she was at the board. She was, when she retired, she was joint managing director. So basically we had to do these moves to make sure that momentum happened. There's several other moves that I can talk about. We talked about the board. The board, right early on, by I think 2001, 2002, when we became a full-fledged bank, we had 4 women executives on the board. And that is an 11% board, if I remember. So maybe a 1/3 or 35% number. Could it have been more? Yes, it could have been more. These are all women executives, leadership positions on the board. Why couldn't it be more? We had a limit in terms of how many executive directors we could have. And all 4 positions, if I recollect right, were taken up at that point in time by women on the board. At that point in time, independent women directors were not easy to get because the roster was small and whoever was there was already in some other board where we could not do it. So we got our own women, not to find any balance. They got there on I would say, merit. We said, again, there is a thought that came out that are women setting limits on themselves? Not in my experience, not in the environment that we provided. I don't think any woman set limits on what she could aim for, her ambition, and what she went out and achieved. Again, there was this bias that was mentioned about travel. I don't think there was any bias in travel at all. I think women traveled as widely, as frequently as men, with a child at home and managing the home, multitasking all the time. I saw no constraint at all. I specifically asked women leaders about this, no constraint at all. In a very lighter way, I can say that only change women leaders did in travel was, particularly when traveling with me, was because I traveled in only a hand baggage. There is a trolley which came with me. I must say that all women leaders in ICICI switched to a trolley very quickly, whether they were traveling with me or whether they were traveling on their own. I think they just found it so much more efficient, particularly when getting back home. You are getting back home by a late flight. You don't want to be another 45 minutes at the airport waiting for your bag. You just walk out, step into your car, and you're home with your child. That was more earlier. Action part of it, I will spend in just about 30 seconds or a minute. What I found is the key is no bias. And this is the biggest challenge that is there because there are so many biases that get infected. Merit-based recruitment, there is a bias. Remove that bias. Roles women can play in the organization, bias. Remove that bias. Equal pay, if there are biases, remove that bias. In our case, that was not an issue that I could see. Merit-based evaluation, certainly, yes, there is a bias. Remove that bias. And indeed, merit-based growth opportunities, work to no bias. And you will see a different, gender-neutral organization where the glass ceiling doesn't exist. Are there challenges? Yes. I think all have been mentioned by Ms. Professor Agarwal, so I won't go into that. These are internal and external. And all of them come through 2 key things: biases that I mentioned and male assumptions, stereotyping. Not only male assumptions, this is family stereotyping also. And sometimes I think the challenges are also because people who could help in the process do not ask the right questions. Like, the question that I asked by accident about late working. Are you, in both contexts, in the Chennai context and in the earlier on in the very early project appraisal days, working very late at night? If these sort of questions are not asked, you don't have the answers. External, Professor Agarwal has covered all the family mindsets and biases, women, what role a woman could do. And I think there is one point, maybe Agarwal mentioned, but I have to underscore this, which we found as a challenge, was when a spouse moved, the woman leader wanted to move. And I would have my other senior women leaders who were at the board really getting upset with this. And there would be a talking to session with the particular lady who wanted to move with her husband to Singapore or wherever, to Dubai or wherever, and say that, why doesn't your spouse stay with you? Why do you have to move? This was always the outcome. This was always the challenge. I cannot talk about the outcome because the outcome probably was not as successful as we would have liked it to be. So what do we then see as a consequence of this? A very broad-based foundation got built, which allowed for a very rapid movement in people. The pool got widened in the context of the organization. Today, compared to 20 years back, both the STEM pool, from what I could see, the STEM pool is today probably 30, 35, no, 40% plus women. And even the management graduate pool is probably 35% or so. I could be, probably is higher even as I speak. I think gives organization no excuse not to build, I would say, a balanced organization at the ground level as you start. Clearly, as I said, lateral moves are required and action from the top. Executive as well as non-executive board positions is required to make sure that women leaders grow into these organizations. And if necessary, repurpose the professionals and move them into positions. Like I said, I quoted Ms. Kalpana Morparia's name, moved from legal to treasury. I won't name others. But when we had a difficulty in getting women leaders onto the main board of ICICI, they got to be the CEOs of large group subsidiaries. And they grew there, and at some point in time, they made their entry back into the ICICI board. So do not try to say, I throw up my hand, find solutions. And I'm not going to male leaders, I'm telling this to the organization. And you will then have the organization that you want. Finally, I think we have the momentum today, and that it is on us to act. I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kamath. Now that you're here, I also want to share with you that most of the women that I interacted from banking and finance, they all were very grateful to you. And they almost all of them agreed they might not have met you as young as 30, 35, that you are the one who brought in that kind of change in the industry. So thanks to you on behalf of all the ladies that I spoke to you. And
Thank
wish
you.
we can have more Mr. Kamath in other industries as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kamath, for sharing all those insights and anecdotes. And I think what you said about a bias-free organization and cross-functional roles, I think resonated with all of us. And in response to one of your points, I'm one of those lucky women whose husband did move when I took on this role. So yeah. I'd now like to welcome Mr. Arun Duggal this evening. Firstly, Mr. Duggal, thank you so much for your generosity in contributing towards this study as part of the Arun Duggal ESG Center of Research and Innovation, but also for spending so much time on this project. I know it's been such a favorite and close to your heart theme. And as part of doing this project, I think you've also created a community of industry leaders and like-minded people. And I hope that this group continues to thrive in other discussions and other projects as well. Mr. Duggal also, we are proud to say, is an IMA PGP. He passed out in 1974. I think I confused that with my year there. Apologies. He's had a prolific career in banking with over 25 years with Bank of America in various roles. He's currently chairman of ICRA, and he's also on the board of ITC, Jubilant Pharma. And one of his roles in which I also get to engage with him is his chairman of the board of the IIT Delhi Endowment Foundation. And I've been so grateful for your support to the IMA Endowment Fund and also to the Institute in ESG-related activities. I now cordially invite Mr. Duggal to address the audience and also introduce our other special guest for the evening, Ms. Nooyi.
Thank you, Chavi. KVK, this was a fantastic address. All the stories you told had such a deep meaning, and it was really coming from the heart. I have always respected you for your personal contribution to advancement of women in ICICI, which became a role model for other institutions. But I respect you even more because you are 3 years senior to me in IIM Ahmedabad. Now let's move to the next session, the Fireside Chat, which promises to be most interesting. In 2009, when Prime Minister Manmohan Singh visited Washington, D.C., President Barack Obama was introducing to him leading American CEOs. When they got to Ms Indra Nooyi, CEO of PepsiCo, Prime Minister Singh exclaimed, "Oh, but she's one of us." President Obama, with a big smile and without missing the beat, responded, but she's one of us also. Ladies and gentlemen, we at IIM Ahmedabad also stake a claim on Ms Indra Nooyi, at least as a cousin. Her sister Chandrika was at IIM Ahmedabad about some time when I was there. I'm personally delighted to welcome Ms Indra Nooyi for this event. I had a good fortune to work with her on a project several years ago. Ms Indra Nooyi served as a CEO and chairperson of PepsiCo from 2006 to 2019. She is revered as a role model for women and immigrants and celebrated for her empowering message of inclusivity. At PepsiCo, she was chief architect of performance with purpose, the company's mission to deliver sustained growth by making more nutritious products, limited company's environment footprint, and empowering its associates and people in the communities it serves. She's been awarded Padma Bhushan in India and the US State Department's Award for Outstanding American by Choice. And has 15 other honorary degrees. She holds a BS from Madras Christian College and an MBA from Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta, and Masters of Public Administration and Management from Yale Universities. My other two guests in this fireside chat are Ipshita Peters, who has a degree in English literature from St. Xavier's in Mumbai. After that, she worked in NICA, which has been founded by Falguni Nair, another distinguished alumna of IIM Ahmedabad. Ipshita is the coordinator of Women's Leadership Society at IIM Ahmedabad. The other participant is Rinkesh Benani, a second-year student at IIM Ahmedabad. Rinkesh is a chartered accountant and a graduate from St. Xavier's College, Calcutta. I now hand over to Ipshita and Rinkesh to start a conversation with Ms. Indra Nooyi. Over to you.
Thank you very much, sir. A very warm welcome to Ms. Nooyi and everyone else present here. Both Rinkesh and I have read your book, My Life in Full, and we're very much looking forward to chatting with you about it. So for our first question for today, there's a very famous report by Hewlett-Packard that found that men apply for a job when they meet only 60% of the qualifications, whereas women only apply when they meet 100% of them. How do you think we can proactively make an effort to make women more confident in their abilities? And how can women themselves be more confident when it comes to asking others for their share, or when it comes to the advancement of their career?
Thank you, Ipshita. Good to see you both. KV, very good to see you again. That was a wonderful, wonderful talk. And Arun, thank you for inviting me to this. And Promila, I thought your report was wonderful. We can talk more about it. It's true. In the past, it used to be women had to have 150% of the qualifications of a man. Now I'm glad it's coming down. That's one positive way to look at things. But it is true that the problem lies in the companies and the women. Companies look at women's CVs and say, I don't know if she's really good. What KV was saying about look at all talent on an equal plane. Don't even think about the gender or the ethnicity. Just look at them as a great talent. We haven't got there as yet. And so what happens is when you read a woman's resume, you're immediately saying to yourself, oh my God, what are the derailers? When you're looking at the man's resume, you're saying, what are the promoters? And so you've got this, the man gets the benefit of the and, the woman gets the discount of the but, but she can't do this. Two things have to happen. There's got to be a critical mass of women in organizations with the track record. So people can point to that and say, man or woman shouldn't make a difference. Look at the women in our organization. They're doing so well. And Ipshita, the one most important thing is, and going back to what KV said too, men in power have to be educated. Men in society have to be educated not to discriminate against women. I mean, the example that KV gave about the taxi, the reason KV was worried about the woman going home so late in a taxi is because he was worried whether some man would attack the woman. He wasn't worried that something else could happen to her. He worried about the men. I think there's a profound education of men that has to be done to say, hey, women are half of society. In the Indian culture, we revere women. We hold women up as the greatest goddesses in the world. Why is it in real life we throw all these biases and have to worry about whether they're going to get attacked or whether they can go home at 2 a.m. without any fear? So I think there's a reckoning that's coming and we all have to think and talk about it. But the short answer, Pshita, is you need a critical mass of women with a performance record. So initially you may have to have some quotas to get them in. And once you have that track record, you start to remove biases from the minds of men who'd say women can't do it.
Right. Thank you for the answer, ma'am. So as you rightly mentioned, there are a lot of biases with respect to women. But women in India face a different set of issues because of our cultural beliefs and upbringing. You mentioned about the incident about the crown in the garage, where you got the role of the president of PepsiCo. You came home only to your mother asking you to go out and buy milk. So women are often expected to take up a dual role that is not allowed to intermingle. So as a mother yourself, how do you think that this is changing today?
Well, when she told me that was 2000. If 22 years later, those practices still exist, we have a big problem. The fact of the matter is my mother belonged to a totally different generation. But don't forget, that's the same mother who allowed me to leave the United States, leave India for the United States. She's the same mother who said, it's okay if you don't want to get married at age 18. The same mother who said, study as much as you can. Both of you can go to Ahmedabad and Calcutta, wherever you want to go. So, there was one foot on the brake, one foot on the accelerator. There's no question that when the father and mother come home, you've got to leave the crown in the garage. Both husband and wife, not just the wife. Because when you come to the family doesn't work for you. You are a parent or a daughter or a son-in-law. And so what I dismiss is the idea that the woman should leave the crown in the garage and the man should be given a crown to wear when he comes home. I dismiss that thought. I think both should leave a crown in the garage. But the fact of the matter is what my mother was telling me, which I processed later, was this issue of power and humility. Keep all the power aspects outside the home. When you come home, there's got to be the appropriate level of humility. But Rinkesh, let me say something else. When we talk about family, we shouldn't say family is female. Family is family. It includes husband, wife, everybody in the family. Somehow when we talk about family, we assume it's female. Even in companies, when we talk about family, we say, what's a woman going to do? Is she going to be moving with transfers? I write an incident in the book when PepsiCo India needed a CFO. And there were no women on the PepsiCo India management layer. So I said to them, aren't you going to hire a woman? You need some different voice around the table. And the answer was, if we hired a woman and a husband got transferred, she'd leave. We can't take the chance. So no, I don't see that as a barrier, but why did the previous CFO leave? Oh, his wife got a job in another city and he transferred. Do you see this? When the husband transfers with the wife, it's considered a progressive husband. He's wonderful. How cute. When a wife has to go, it's like, you see, I told you, women always leave. Again, goes back to the first question you asked, Ipshita. I think we have to remove those biases. The final point I'll make here. When we give birth to a girl child, the first thought in our mind when that girl child is born is not, oh, I just gave birth to a lifelong laborer who's going to be unpaid for her entire life. Is that what we think? Is that really what we think? I mean, I look at Arun Duggal and look at his daughter, Anu Duggal, one of the most phenomenal female founders in the country here in the United States. Arun, I don't think when Anu was born, you said, oh, I just gave birth to an unpaid laborer for life. Did you? I hope not. No. So why is it we treat women that way? We wouldn't want our daughters to be treated that way, our sisters, our wives to be treated that way at the place of work. Why do we treat other women that way in the place of work? So I think that at home, we have to rewrite the rules for how women are treated to make it more equitable for everybody to be treated the same way. And at work, we have got to remove some of the barriers because as K.V. Kamath said so profoundly, the country, India as a country is only going to be differentiated because of its talent. Talent is the biggest item in short supply. And women are wicked smart these days. They are hungry. They want the power of the purse. Many, many families are fragile and women want to stand on their own 2 feet. And guess what? The Indian Constitution says Indian men and women are equal. Doesn't it, K.V? I think it does. So I think we've got to go back and revisit those truths.
Right. Ma'am, so when it comes to establishing diversity goals for gender balance, there can sometimes be a bias against women who are appointed in such roles, where they are assumed to have gained a position solely based on a gender quota or some kind of quota or less on merit. So this is true even within organizational spaces and also educational spaces. So how do you deal with this issue, not just in organizations, but also in society in general?
You see, Pshita, you cannot practice inclusive behavior in a company unless you have a critical mass of women. I mean, how can you teach inclusive behavior to people in the company if there aren't enough women or different ethnicities to practice inclusion on? So if you have just 1 or 2 women in the top 4 levels of the company, people go to inclusion training, and then what happens? Nothing happens. So in the first phase, you've got to put in quotas, you've got to get a critical mass of talent that's different into the organization. That is step 1. Until you do that, you cannot change the organization. So initially, will there be some snide remarks that this is a quota hire? Yeah, put up with it. I was called a quota hire in PepsiCo. And I said, I'll show you. I'll show you what a quota hire I was. Okay, and so look, they'll call you a quota hire, they'll call you hire just because woman, whatever, she must have known somebody in the top management. Focus on your competence. Companies cannot succeed today without the best talent, and women represent an incredible talent pool. You've got to have that confidence. Now, I'm not saying ignore the men. It's men and women. Treat them both the same and treat them as the best talent. But stage 1 is quotas to get a critical mass of women. Then you practice inclusive behavior. Then you create a better organization.
Right. Okay. So when you're so successful, there's a sense of loneliness. You can't relate and share things with a lot of colleagues. Though this loneliness at the top affects both men and women, but do you think it affects women CEOs more than men CEOs?
Well, I think it does, because men CEOs have got well-developed brotherhoods from the past. I mean, remember, men have always been in power. So they've got a whole network of men's organizations, men's clubs, that, they have small brotherhoods they can talk with. There are no such organizations for women. And funnily, Rinkesh, I don't know if this is the case in India, but even when there are 1 or 2 women's organizations, women quickly leave it and go join a co-ed organization. They don't want to be seen as only being part of a women's organization. So some of the problem lies with women too. But I will tell you, once you reach the CEO level, everything has to change, because you cannot share anything with anybody. You cannot share the company's secrets with your friends. You can't get advice from anybody by sharing any confidential material. And if you came home and talked to your spouse about all these issues all the time, pretty soon that person is going to get turned off. Because how many problems can you bring home? I mean, you're home for such a short time that you're really productive. So in those hours, you've got to also have cheerful conversations. So I'd say that anybody who wants to come to the C-suite and be a CEO has to have incredible resilience, backbone, ability to process things inside you and come up with an answer, and not have to depend on a lot of people for advice and support. It requires people with enormous backbones. I don't know if K.V. feels the same way. He's been a leader in so many organizations. But I have to tell you, loneliness is our middle name. I don't know, K.V., did you have a point of view on that? You're on mute.
You're on mute, K.V.
No, I entirely agree. 100% with what you're saying.
Indra, would you like to ask a few questions to these Ipshita and Rinkesh?
Oh, I'd love to. May I? I guess the first question to you, Rinkesh, is, what is the interaction between men and women at IIM Ahmedabad these days? What percentage are women? And do men feel threatened by the women? Or do they feel like, wow, this is great, that a lot of women coming into the workforce? Leading question.
Right. So at IIM Ahmedabad, the ratio of women has been on an increase. So right now in my batch, the ratio is somewhere around 25 to 30%. So
that's it.
Compared to what it was before, so it's been on an inclining mode. But with respect to the second part of your question, do we men feel threatened by women? I do not really think that we feel threatened, because I believe that men play an equal part in fight for the gender equality. So while growing up, I have had a lot of women influence in my life, and they have always supported and encouraged me in every step of the way. And it has been vice versa. So basically, we are partners in progress. So.
And your point, Ipshita, how are you treated in the classrooms? Do they let you talk? Do they talk over you, the men?
I don't think there's a lot of overt sexism anymore, especially at least in a classroom. Most people won't, come out and say something that's deliberately discriminatory. But at the same time, I think, there are a lot of subtle things that do sometimes happen, like some kind of microaggression that, takes place. And I think that's just a larger problem with society, not just educational spaces as such, where, sometimes people don't really realize they're being discriminatory. They just say something or do something sometimes that, you might feel bad about, but, sometimes they might not even realize that they're saying it. So at least for me, that's sort of a bigger issue that I've faced.
What happens when you face microaggression? Do you sit down and talk about it and call that person out and say, hey, do you realize that you just practice microaggression in all its glory? What do you do?
It's definitely tough sometimes. I think before, maybe I didn't really speak up so much, but I think, as I've sort of learned more about this space and more about these issues, I think that also helps, sort of stand up against it. And I think also looking at other women around me standing up for it, especially people I look up to, some of my seniors. I think when I see them sort of standing up against things, that also gives me the courage to stand up against it. So that's been very helpful.
Do you have a women's group at Ahmedabad where you talk about these issues?
Yes, ma'am. So we have a Women Leadership Society, which is a completely student-run body. So largely what we do here is try and sensitize people to issues regarding women. So mostly that involves doing speaker sessions with women leaders and tying up with different organizations to talk about these issues. But I think largely—
But you talk about the behavior in the institute itself. The reason I'm asking this question is how the men and women graduate from the management institutes is how they're going to be behaving when they get to the corporate world. So right there, we have to sensitize them to working with women. 30% is a decent number, not a great number. But at 30%, assume that corporations have 30% women too. You've got to let them speak. You shouldn't talk over them when they're, making a point. Don't roll your eyes when the woman's talking. Don't exclude the women when you're out there huddling on some issue. Maintain your distance. If those things are not happening within the classroom in Ahmedabad, why do we believe it's going to happen when they get to work? Think about it.
Okay. Anything else, Ipshita, Rinkesh?
Yeah, I have one last question for you, ma'am. So looking back today, is there anything you would have done differently in your tenure as a CEO?
If I'd had all these technologies that we have today, I would have been much more, it would have been much more possible for me to go home earlier in the day and spend time with my kids. Remember, none of these technologies existed. Even the smartphone was just beginning to emerge. So there was no texting and FaceTime, none of that stuff. So I had to travel all the time and I had to work late. Had these technologies existed, I would have traveled half as much. I would have gone home at 3:30, taken my kids off the school bus and continued working when they were doing their homework. So I wish I was CEO at a different time when technology was so developed. On the other hand, it's the luck of the draw. My only regrets were how I allocated my time, but I had no choice at that time. And I must say, I married right, and my husband was an equal partner in everything I did. And this is a piece of advice for all of you. If you're going to get married, choose the right husband, but more importantly, choose the right in-laws. It's almost like you have to interview the in-laws because I tell you something, my in-law family supports me more than even my own family. They are phenomenal. Make sure you choose the right in-laws. Not that you have much of a choice, but choose the right in-laws.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Indra, and thank you, Ipsita and Rinkesh, for a very delightful, insightful session. We now move to the next section in which we're going to make some recommendations. And these recommendations are have to be now modified and added based on what we have heard today from K.V. Kamath and Indra Nooyi. But here we are. First point I want to make is that gender balance improvement is achievable. Not only what we have seen happen at ICICI Bank, but also in today's world. I chair the board of our company, Moody's subsidiary ICRA Limited in India. We have 50% women directors there. Both the chair of the audit committee and the chair of the NRC are women independent directors. One of them is from IIM Ahmedabad. Accenture India, which has 250,000 employees, women account for 45% of the workforce. And the goal is to reach 50% by 2025. Unilever has a goal to reach 50% gender balance by 2025 globally. United Nations has achieved 42% women on its worldwide staff, and the target is to achieve 50%. As indicated by Professor Promila Agarwal in her presentation, the number of women directors has increased from 4.5% to 16%, initially admittedly through the regulatory action, but now it is happening automatically. So here are a few recommendations. Next, please. Next. First, somebody has to take charge, and the board of directors and nominations and remuneration committee in particular, their mandate should include improving gender balance and offering women better career opportunities. We should also encourage women directors who have joined the boards in the last 5-6 years be given opportunities to chair board subcommittees such as NRC, audit committees, and hopefully not too distant future chair the boards themselves. The CEOs and top management performance evaluation and compensation should include a factor of gender balance improvement in their area of work. Next. Now, here's something I'm suggesting, that companies should establish diversity goals for themselves. And they need to look a little distant in the future, 5, 10, 20 years, and see where they want to be. Now, on carbon footprint and climate change, we have set up goals where we want to be in 2040, 2050, 2060. Now, this issue is a socially important issue about gender gap. And here again, we should set up goals. Next, please. Here's an example I'm showing you. Here's a company which has, in December 2021, 12% women in the workforce. And the compensation of these women is 10% of the compensation. So there's a payment gap, a compensation gap also. Now, if they were to set up a goal that by 2025, in different categories in their hierarchy, they want to reach certain gender ratios by 2025, 2030, and also close the compensation gap. I think it will get done. Once you have numbers, once you have goals, then people are focused on achieving them. Next, please. It's not only and it's not only business organizations, professional firms such as law firms, accounting, management consulting, they also have strategies to reduce gender gap. In government, civilian, railways, army, police, all these institutions should have a focus on improving their gender balance. Other institutions, hospitals, universities, NGOs, and IIM Ahmedabad should also have a strategy to reduce the gender gap. Next, please. Now, diversity action plan. Here I have listed a few things and I'll go through them. But after Mr. Kamath's presentation and Indra's comments today, I think there would be a number of things which can be added. Now, KVK did mention a lot of very, very important things that I wasn't aware of. So here's a list of things that I thought of. The first one is a standard one, constitution of a diversity council consisting of men and women from various levels in the company. Second is diversity cultural training at all levels. Third is increase the percentage of women at intake level. Next. Fourth is family-friendly policies, increase maternity, paternity leave, child care facilities, or child care allowance, something Promila talked about. Elder care allowance, because in Indian context, in particular, women have this extra requirement of taking care of parents, in-laws, and that's an additional factor they have to consider. And then some fun things like bring child to work day at companies, some help, subsidies in tuition payments, annual company picnic, and yes, encourage men to attend PTA rather than women, just women having to go there. Now we talked about both KVK and Indra talked about spouse job consideration for transfers. Job sharing is another very interesting idea. It was covered in Indra's book. And that's not limited to women only, but it also anybody who is not able to devote 100% of the time, but has a lot of talent to bring to the job, they can be encouraged to have job sharing. And then lastly, mentorship and support. We need mentorship both for men and women, and particularly for women, since they are coming up the curve here, they need more support. And then lastly, I would say organizational listening, the listening to on one-on-one basis and small groups. And the KVK, I'll have to add to this list a few other things that you just mentioned today. Next, please. And then finally, we must know how well we are doing. I think there should be an annual board of directors report to shareholders, which should include how much progress we have made under the diversity action plan, and also spell out what are the actual achievements against the diversity goals established by the company. Next, please. With that, I conclude my remarks here, and I'd like to invite Professor Naman Desai to make concluding remarks. Dr. Naman Desai is a professor with finance and accounting area at IIM Ahmedabad. He's a chartered accountant with a PhD in accounting from Florida State University. Dr. Naman Desai is also co-chair of the ESG Research and Innovation Center at IIM Ahmedabad. Over to you, Naman.
Thank you, Arun, for the introduction. And a big thank you to all the attendees of this event. We have more than 300 people participating from different parts of the world. Now, when I was considering the order in which to thank the attendees, I faced a dilemma. I'm like, should I go by the more traditional order where we thank the females first and then it is the turn of the men, or we are in this business of breaking gender stereotypes and biases. So I thought I'll go with the more neutral academic way of thanking people, where we just go by everyone's last name. So I'm going to start by thanking Promila and Mr. Duggal for their insights about their reports, Mr. Kamath for giving a wonderful keynote address and taking out time from his busy schedule to be here, and Ms. Nooyi again for that wonderful and insightful fireside chat, and again for taking time out of our very busy schedule and being part of this event. I'm sure this discussion helped in putting an inquisitive spotlight on issues related to the presence and role of women in top managerial positions in companies. And more importantly, through the center's work and future discussions like this, we hope to drive more fundamental and systemic changes to prevailing corporate structures, which in turn facilitate a more organic rather than a forced increase in gender diversity in most corporations and organizations. So with that, I will conclude this event. Again, a very big thank you to all the dignitaries who are here, and also to all the attendees, which is more than 300 people, if I'm not mistaken, for making this a successful event at IIMA and at the Arun Duggal ESG Center. Thank you, and a very good evening or a very good morning to everyone wherever you are.